Hello, Facebook land. I'm Matt Shipman. I'm the Research Communications Lead at NC State University. And with the holidays coming up and in the midst of a pandemic, there are a lot of people with a lot of questions about what we can do, what we should do to keep ourselves safe and keep our loved ones safe as we go into the holidays. So I'm here today with Natalie Seymour and Ben Chapman from NC State University and NC State Extension. And we've got a lot of questions and a lot of ground to cover. We're going to start with COVID-19. We're also going to talk about food safety. And if you have any questions, please let us know. Please be engaged. We'll try to get to them as quickly as we can. And we may already have some of your questions on the docket. So because we don't have forever, I'll dive right in. One of the things that a lot of people have questions about, and actually I'm kind of curious about myself, is while at this point most of us are somewhat familiar with the concept of social distancing, right? I'm not sure that I'm clear on what a socially distanced Thanksgiving would look like. Like, is it indoors? Is it outdoors? What are we talking about when we talk about a socially distanced Thanksgiving?
I'll tackle it first. I mean, so Matt, thanks for being with us today and talking about this. And really and this might sound super like obvious or a little bit of a joke, but the most socially distanced type of Thanksgiving event that I could see is one where people are not physically together whatsoever. And like doing what we're doing right now, which, all three of us are in our separate houses and we're carrying on a conversation. And that's to me, that's where it starts. That is the lowest, highest bar, best practice, lowest risk kind of social distance Thanksgiving or other holiday type event. And that's, it's certainly not where we all want to be, and it's certainly not it's certainly awkward, or can be awkward, but we know through really since the start of this pandemic that the biggest risk is being around other people. And what we've been really focused on with a lot of our projects and our messages is, okay, how do we move on this risk continuum? And really the lowest possible risk is not being with others. That's the most socially distanced way to do this.
Right. Yeah. So with the understanding that if we really want to reduce risk as much as possible, and we really want to do everything we can to keep each other safe, we're not going to have a holiday get together. But for those people that are going to be getting together, they're not listening to us, they're willing to accept a little risk for this, right? Natalie, what does, broadly speaking, what are we talking about when we talk about a socially distanced event in this context?
Yeah, so, I mean, like Ben said, best case, lowest risk scenario is to do something virtually, but you could explore, like, maybe instead of us all hanging out and having dinner, it's we all go on a hike or meet for a picnic and everyone brings their own food and your households are spread out or something like that. Depending on where in the country and what the weather decides to do on Thanksgiving, because that's variable. Maybe it's outside spread out in the yard or something like that, or Thanksgiving Thanksgiving without the meal seems kind of non-existent, but if being in proximity to family and friends is the highest priority and people are willing to take some risk on with that, maybe it's alternate activities where you can still have a mask on and where you're outside or you're doing all of the above.
Right. So indoors gatherings, people sitting around the table, that's out of the question at this point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly the highest risk thing that we could do in as having a Thanksgiving gathering. I think,
and having a gathering that's including people who are not in your current household.
Right.
To specify, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to sort of talk through all of these things that Natalie mentioned, where it's like there are barriers that we can put in place. There are these, we talk about it in food safety as hurdles. So inside versus outside. Well, outside has much more fresh air exchange. I mean, it's outdoors. That we know that air exchange is a factor in transmission of SARS-CoV-2.
But it's not
virus.
magic, right? Like
Yeah.
being outside doesn't magically mean COVID won't work, right?
No, it doesn't, but it certainly is lower risk.
Right.
And it has to do with just how air moves within a building, and we're learning more and more about the virus itself and aerosolization, and really sitting in what air columns in a indoor setting. So once we're outside, that that moves around, and it diffuses, and it allows for, again, like you said, Matt, it doesn't get us to that is zero risk outdoors, but it's certainly lower risk than indoors with lots of enclosed spaces.
Yes. And we're talking outdoors as in outdoors open air, not outdoors in an enclosed tent, because that's
which is actually indoors, but on a sidewalk. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And then one other thing that Natalie mentioned that I think also calculates into this risk continuum is face coverings versus no face coverings, and that it really matters. I mean, there's lots of rhetoric around face coverings, but there's also a ton of data, both from other respiratory viruses and increasingly from SARS-CoV-2, and not just like scientific studies with experiments, but also a ton of epidemiology showing how useful face coverings are to capture moisture droplets and reduce the risk of transmission. So for me, in a gathering, it's like, okay, not having one, that's lowest risk, right? We are going to get together. Okay, well, we better do things outdoors and with face coverings, because it's certainly riskier, but that will continue to reduce our risk of getting people together.
So that I'm glad you brought that up, because I have a question about that. So if there are people that are coming together and they're going to be eating outside, right, like potluck style or whatever, not necessarily at the same table, but eating outside, obviously you can't eat while you're wearing a mask. And so there are two things that I wanted to ask about. So one is, what role does mask wearing play in that situation? And then and actually, let's just ask that, and then I have another question as well. So, like, is there still a role for masks if you're going to be dining outdoors, right, al fresco?
Yeah, certainly there is. I mean, what we know about the transmission of the virus in many different settings is that the more that we're around people close without face coverings, the more likelihood the transmission is going to happen. So sitting, we'll pretend that people are getting together. They're sitting at maybe a table, but they are socially distanced. Having that hurdle of a mask when they're not physically eating things, it really matters. Like that extra hurdle that's in place when in between bites, and it's super awkward. Like, this is the part that I 100% get, because I know that's the thought is like, well, going to a restaurant or sitting at a meal with a bunch of folks, not in my family, well, it's going to be awkward if we like lift our masks and chew and put our masks back down. It's like, yes, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Everything's awkward. Like, it's not.
But there are also ways you could get around that if you were to put people in pods based off their household. So who lives with each other, who's already doing day-to-day life without a mask on. And so, yeah, you don't get together with your extended family to sit separately from them, but that's a way to avoid potentially the up and down mask wearing thing is, hey, okay, so you pick the person who has the biggest yard, they're the one who's hosting, and then every family has their own table, or you're sitting in a circle and you're really far apart, so there's no table, because very few tables are going to let someone be 6 feet across from each other. And that's one way that you could kind of get around that a little bit, is only have, when you're not wearing a mask, be in proximity to the people who you already live with. But it's still awkward.
Yeah. So Natalie, you mentioned the 6 feet thing, and that was the other thing that I wanted to ask about. So when when we hear about or think about or talk about social distancing, people often think of that as being sort of wear a mask, maintain 6 feet of social distance, right? And the 6 feet part, again, that's not like some sort of magic number, right? That's sort of a bare minimum of distance. And ideally you want more space, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not like you have this force field of 6 feet around you and then the virus will just like stop and die instantly. That's not how it works. It's just that you're going to get a higher concentration of the virus in those aerosolized particles when you're talking and spitting and all that kind of stuff. And it dilutes as the farther it goes. So I likened it earlier today to those like bright colored smoke things that people do for gender reveals. I don't know what they're actually called, but they're a bright color concentrated. When you first pop the smoke thing, I don't know, again, I don't know, but they become more faded as it goes farther away, right? Because
Sure.
the color is becoming less concentrated. That's what's happening. It doesn't mean that you don't end up with respiratory droplets someplace else. It doesn't mean that they don't have virus after 6 feet. They're just becoming much more diluted, so the risk is lower. But if 6 feet is good, 10 feet is better, and 12 feet is even better than that.
Right. Okay. Um, so when we think about getting together for Thanksgiving or for another holiday, if we are eating, because I mean Thanksgiving is really, at least in my household, is a very food driven holiday. So there's sort of two pieces, right? There's the cooking of the food, and then there's like the serving of the food or the handling of the food. So just focusing on and actually there's more than that, but whatever. I'm going to oversimplify. So and on the cooking part, I think let's rewind and back up, right? So there are people who are getting takeout, right, from restaurants and things like that. So what are the things? Why is that safe? Like, why is it okay for us to eat food that's cooked by other people? And what are the steps that we need to take if we are cooking food for other people to make sure that we're reducing the risk as much as possible of transmitting COVID-19? And Ben, I'm going to pick on you to start
Yeah.
this one.
No, and it, Matt, it's a really great question that has been coming up really since the start of this pandemic. And what really got Natalie and I super involved in this intersection between food safety and COVID-19 is exactly the question that you asked, which is it a foodborne illness? And okay, if it's not, why not? And how do we know that? And all those kind of like subsequent questions that pop up. So here's the quick answer to that. The biology of the virus doesn't really lend itself to being food to lend itself to be transmitted through food. Now that I'm super careful with my words as I stumbled across them there, because certainly it would not be surprising at all if a restaurant had a cluster of COVID-19 illnesses and food handlers were asymptomatic or even symptomatic and happened to be still working, that the virus itself ended up on food or on utensils or on food packaging. That's really actually not the question in the scientific world so much. I think we look at that and say, oh, that's a given. The virus is on people or in people. They're shedding it. They're talking, breathing. We know that that's how the virus comes out. It's got to settle somewhere. The real aspect of why we don't see
this is grossing me out, by the way.
Yeah, sorry. Why we don't see the illnesses and why we're not, why we haven't focused on it as a foodborne illness. It has to do with the biology of the virus and how it infects us. There's sort of two mechanisms happening here. One is the virus itself has this outer shell, a capsid, protein capsid. That protein capsid is really susceptible to two things that we've learned about. Well, multiple things. One, soap. We've heard quite a bit about hand washing, and that essentially breaks that, this envelope apart where all the genetic materials inside. And the other way to disrupt it, or another way to disrupt that protein envelope coat, is through changes in acidity. And our stomach actually is a really nice high acid environment that will help break that that virus apart. And the virus itself, once it's apart, can't then infect the our cells, and so there could be genetic material that makes its way through our body, and into our poop and into. That's why wastewater surveillance has come up, because we do see viral RNA in waste, but
right. But it's no longer capable of making you sick.
Exactly. Yeah. It's gone through the process. The other big area, I guess there's two other things I want to highlight here. One has to do with where are the infections likely to come, and it's in the respiratory tract. And this is like a terrible joke that I know Matt will appreciate, because I think he shares my love of dad jokes in a ironic kind of way. And that's that if you are getting food in your respiratory system, you're doing it wrong. Like we just don't aspirate food so much. And so it's not to say that it can't get there. And in fact, there's always a chance, right? Like, and that's one of the things that we look at in science is it's not nothing is zero, but we're really talking about a 1 in a billion probability, a 1 in 10 billion probability. And certainly it's not anywhere near the other transmission routes, even if that low. When we look at person-to-person transmission being so high, it's like way, way, way at the top of the list. Food just isn't something that that we really should be concerned about from a transmission route. Yes, you go ahead. I have more. I could just talk the whole time.
I have more too.
I'll just close everybody's window and I'll just do a talk. No, yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Well, no, so that being the case, and I do find it very interesting, actually. Viruses are fascinating, if terrifying. Are they alive? Are they not? Discuss. But you'd gotten to a point where it was clear that like cooked food or consuming cooked food is not a particularly high risk for people. I mean, you're more likely to win the lottery than you are to contract COVID in that way. But that leaves the other thing. So Natalie, once the food is prepared, right, then it goes into a bowl or into a serving dish or into a casserole dish or whatever, and it's put on the table. So what sort of risks does that introduce, and how do we minimize those risks when we're sharing a meal, even if it's outdoors, even if it's distanced?
Yeah, and one thing to mention on that, it's not just the cooked food. So you can have raw vegetables and stuff too. If the virus is there and you still eat it like a normal way you're supposed to eat food.
Don't breathe this out.
Right, well, this is like, again, this sounds gross, but this is the time to make sure the kids aren't sticking carrot sticks up their nose. So like that is a way.
Yeah, that is probably
I would say you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so a lot of people have thought like I can only eat cooked food, it has to be heated, all that kind of stuff. You can still have sushi for Thanksgiving, you can still have your vegetable platter, all that kind of stuff. The same rules apply of we've always said wash your hands and don't like blow your nose and then go back to cooking food for people, and don't like sneeze on food intentionally, because it's gross, right? It's gross. But with the serving utensils, so surface transmission is a factor in spreading COVID-19. It's not as high of a risk as being in close proximity. And so if you're talking about, okay, the priority for whatever group of people is that they needed to eat a meal together. Well, you're going to want to do everything else you can to reduce the risk of any sort of transmission. So maybe it's everyone washes their hands and uses hand sanitizer and serves their food and then washes their hands and uses hand sanitizer again. Something like that. That would be an instance of you would have had to have someone who has the virus either pre-symptomatically or asymptomatically, got that virus on their hands. So they were probably sneezing, coughing, blowing their nose, whatever, touching that serving utensil, touching that bowl, counter, so on, serving the food, and then someone came behind them, touched it, and then used their hands and ate. And so hand sanitizer and hand washing and all that could break that if it were there. It could also be everyone wears masks while they serve their food, and the food stays in the kitchen or on the buffet table or however you do it. so that there's that separation there. And then you have the hand sanitizer on both ends, or you wash your hands all the time. And I don't know, get the Thanksgiving smelling soap so it's less boring.
Right. So you introduce multiple layers of protection. You're spaced from each other. You're using the masks while you get the food. You might be using your own utensils or using hand sanitizer before and after service. But come on, brain. There was just something you were thinking about. Oh, right. So if we're thinking about washing your hands before and after serving food, right? And everything is outside, then most people don't have sinks in the yard, or even a pump, right? But so how do you kind of coordinate? You don't want to be like walking past each other in the doorway either, right? So how do you coordinate sort of going in and out of the house, both for the hand washing or like, when the kids need to go to the bathroom or whatever? Like how do you arrange that?
Yeah, so one thing on this, I'd go with hand sanitizer has a real role here, and we are in so many ways extremely unlucky in this pandemic, but in one way, from a scientific standpoint, we're lucky that this virus has susceptibility against alcohol, and meaning that blows apart the virus, and so being able to just have that hand sanitizer available, it's one of the times where we're really comfortable saying using hand sanitizer is as good as washing hands.
Right. And I know that that's not true for a number of other
it's
pathogens, right?
It's a tough one. It kind of depends, and that science is evolving. On this one, it's a clear path that
right on.
It works really, really well.
Go ahead, Natalie. I could tell you were about to say something.
I was saying with the question of people need to use the restroom, how do you do all of that? I mean, that's going to be a matter of you figure out your floor plan, you figure out where people are eating outside and what is the fastest way to get to a restroom. And then it's just going to be like families don't normally function like you do in a restaurant where you're waiting far enough away to not be creepy. But that's what you got to do now, right? It's kind of a one person goes at a time, like goes in the house at a time, that kind of a thing. It's just, it's trying to not congregate is.
Right.
Before we leave restrooms, can I mention one thing on this? And it's not something that we have, there's so much evolving data. So it's not like I can point to something on this, but I look at a restroom in my house as a really small space. And if I've got 4 people that are using that restroom, one after another, and they're breathing in there without masks on, without face coverings, and that virus we know it kind of hangs in the air sometime. There's a few strategies that I'm thinking about that I would want to do. First of all, I want to remind people that even when they're going to the restroom, wear a mask. Keep it on. There's no reason to remove it at that time, capture those droplets. But then I'm turning the fan on if I have one, or keeping the window in the restroom open to encourage that air exchange. Because to me, that's a riskier place to be in that small, unless you've got like, a vast restroom of luxury, which I do not have. It's not, to me that is certainly that's a riskier situation. Yeah. And that, I'm not saying that this is me trying to placate to my kids who just want to go pee in the bushes in the front yard or the backyard. This literally is something that I think about as it relates to these gatherings. Doing a good job social distancing outside, but all of a sudden we're all using the same space inside.
And it sounds a little bit like all these things are excessive. So I can get it if someone's on the other end and they're like, okay, these people are crazy. But if you think about your car, like you keep your tires up to, like you make sure your tires don't have the treads worn down, make sure your brake pads are decent, you have brake fluid, you have your steering's working, you have windshield wipers, all so that if you're driving in a storm and you have to press the brakes really quickly, you're not going to veer off the road. You're not going to go out of control. And so it's not that you just rely on your seatbelt, but you rely on all these other things to make sure if you're in a precarious situation, you're safe, right? we're in a really precarious situation. We just don't usually think Thanksgiving is like that for this reason. And so it seems excessive, but really at the end of the day is we don't want more people getting sick.
Well, and you know, we're talking about millions of people that have been infected, so I don't know that it does sound excessive, right? So it's like, stay 6 or 7 or 8 feet away from somebody, wear a mask, wash your hands. The downside to that is pretty low. If you don't do those things and someone you care about gets sick, the downside to that is pretty high. Even if they don't die, they might run up hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical debt or be intubated for weeks, which is, you know, is just awful. Yeah, so I'm not worried about it sounding, if it sounds excessive to you, maybe re-examine some priorities internally. So one thing I just wanted to stress, because I'm not a scientist, but I do talk to people a lot. That's what I do. Is just make sure that everybody is aware of what the expectations are going in, right? So, hey, we've got the yard. People are going to be coming over. Here's what I'm expecting from you in terms of, you know, when we're going to be wearing masks and when we're not, and you know, please leave the fan on when you go into the bathroom, that sort of thing, right? So one of the questions that I've gotten, this is not a question that I had, but I thought it was an interesting question. So will drinking alcohol affect my chances of getting COVID? The person who asked the question, I think, suspected that it would somehow reduce the risk of COVID transmission, which is intriguing. So, Natalie, what relationship does alcohol have to COVID transmission, if any?
Okay, so if you have alcohol that's 70% or above and you put it in direct contact with the virus, then that works, right? That's what hand sanitizer, that's what surface things. You drinking all day on Thanksgiving does not lessen your risk at all. So the whole correlation that the virus is susceptible to alcohol, yes. In that situation, no.
Most unfortunate.
But,
I speak
yeah.
for dads everywhere when I say that's very disappointing.
But I mean, we've had the question too of like, can I use vodka to clean my counters? No, I mean, you could do anything, but the proof isn't high enough to inactivate the virus, and it's a waste of vodka.
Yeah, so it would have to be 140 proof or higher, correct?
Yeah.
Well, and even that, like, and I don't want to, like, this is a good question, and I want to, like, not sort of dismiss it tritely. Even at 140 proof or higher, I don't think we have enough data that would show that the contact of that alcohol would occur in our gastrointestinal or
no. I don't mean internally. I meant like on the countertop.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, I was like totally like, I'm like, no. I don't think that there's any. But as you asked this question, I did like Google high proof bourbon, and certainly I could get 120 proof bourbon, 60% alcohol. That's out there. 128 is available. But this, so and maybe Matt, this is where you were going with the question as well. I think there is a little bit that's wrapped up because you see restrictions in many jurisdictions around alcohol sales and restaurants and bars closing. And I actually think that there is a risk increase around alcohol consumption when it's alcohol overconsumption, I guess, and that you kind of sort of lose track of what the best practices are, and that
you're just more likely to engage in risky behavior.
Yeah, exactly. What no matter what it is, that's something that we have a lot of data on. So to me, I think not only, as Natalie said, is it not protective, it's probably it could lead to riskier behaviors.
People are more likely to make bad decisions if they've been drinking.
Yeah,
basically. And as somebody who paid his way through school working in bars, I can say that is definitely true. So we've talked about cooking, we've talked about sort of serving and sharing food. One of the other things that I was thinking about was even before you do any of those things is you shop, right? So when preparing for the holidays, even if you're just preparing food for the people that live in your home, right? A smaller Thanksgiving meal, are there things that you would encourage people to do to reduce their risk of COVID in terms of food shopping?
Yeah, I mean, shop ahead of time if you can, because a lot of us have been in charge of shopping for some sort of item near a holiday. And the closer you get to said holiday, the more people there are in the store. If you have the opportunity to order and pick up your groceries or something like that, those are definitely ways that you could help reduce your risk being in that grocery store because, again, the more people you're around, the greater your risk. So a lot of the items can be purchased if you get your turkey frozen and you have space in your freezer. You could go ahead and get it now. If you get shelf stable items, get fruits and vegetables that aren't going to spoil in the next week. You could do all of that ahead of time. Or again, now we have a lot of options depending on where you live of ordering groceries and picking them up. That could be another good option to reduce risk at the grocery store.
So Ben, I feel like this is the sweet spot in the Venn diagram where COVID-19 and foodborne illness really overlap. Focusing specifically on turkey because U.S. Thanksgiving is coming up. But how long can you have a bird in the fridge, right? If you don't have room in the freezer, and how much time do you need to leave for it? How much time can it be? Can it be in there? And then how much time does it need to be in there in order to thaw safely?
This is one of those questions that I'm glad we're doing this where the three of us can have a discussion because everyone looks for like give me the magic
number.
What's the magic answer? Because you want like, all right, 3 days, 7 days, go, right? Or 7 days and 3 days for thawing. And it's unfortunately not that simple. So from a quality standpoint, that's really what we're concerned about with a fresh turkey sitting in a refrigerator. Is there's a bunch of spoilage microorganisms inside and outside in the cavity of that turkey. And those spoilage microorganisms can grow at refrigeration temperatures, right? Like we've experienced this. This is not new to anybody who is familiar.
Anyone who's prepared poultry raw.
Right. Or no, but I was even going to go further. Who has a fridge? Because somehow there has been something that has been left in the back of your fridge and you open it up and it smells bad. It's got mold on it. It's got some sort of growth, like something gross has happened in your fridge. Yes. And that same thing happens with turkey, like with any raw meat. It happens because it's there. It's part of the biological system. So it's a tough one. I would say the closer, and this is where things are kind of wild right now, right? Like pandemic wise, because I think where we are, and this let me like pontificate a little bit because again, we got time for this. This isn't our normal conversation where Ship says, "Can you just give me something real quick?"
Yeah.
No. So I think part of what's gonna happen is that I'm going to seek a smaller turkey than I normally do because I have less people in my home and I don't want like 3 weeks worth of leftovers, right? So I'm not going to be the only one who's looking for a smaller turkey this year. And I wonder how much the turkey supply will recognize that. And I'm gathering, I don't know. I mean, I haven't started looking yet, but I'm gathering it's going to be harder to find smaller turkeys closer to Thanksgiving than it is today. A week and a half away, right?
So Natalie, what are you thinking? I could see you were about to say something.
Oh, I can't guarantee, not going to guarantee anything. That's dangerous. But the poultry industry starts freezing these birds for Thanksgiving over a year in advance. So I don't think we've been in this pandemic situation long enough to predict that people would want smaller birds to completely change the way the industry is doing things. Right. And every bird that I've seen in normal grocery shopping has been traditional Thanksgiving size. So yeah, then I think you're right that if people want a smaller bird, they're gonna have to go very, very soon and potentially shop around.
And so it's like, okay, now I've got, I want to get it like for the best, coming back to your question, Chip, for the like best, yeah, this is how I roll. For the best, like quality without that spoilage, I want to get it as close to the time that I'm going to make it. Like with every day that it's in my refrigerator, there is going to be growth of spoilage microorganisms. So on day 10, certainly when I open that up, there will be more, texture of the meat's going to change. The smell of it when I open it up is certainly going to be different than it is if I go get it from the store the day before Thanksgiving. But I think our problem is going to be the turkeys that I want to get the day before Thanksgiving aren't going to be there. So I got to meet this medium. So for me, I'm like 3 or 4 days. Like if I get to Tuesday of Thanksgiving and I don't have a fresh turkey in my refrigerator, I'm starting to move towards frozen, right? Because of size.
Like most of the grocery stores, at least that I go to, they really only have frozen turkeys available, and they tend to be, around 16 pounds ish.
Yep.
So, that takes, I don't know, a few days at least to thaw, right? Like what, 3 or 4 days?
Yeah, in the refrigerator, 3 or 4 days, and it kind of depends on the size of the bird. It depends on how packed your refrigerator is, and around Thanksgiving, it's probably more, which actually makes it harder to thaw because it's insulating. There's not as much air movement around it. Now, there are other ways to thaw turkey, the other safe ways to thaw turkey, so we can, and there are lots of unsafe ways to do it, but if I thaw it in cool running water, that's going to speed things up. But it's still not like now all of a sudden I've got, and we, the three of us have talked about this in the past. This isn't our first like Thanksgiving discussion, but one of the problems with that is that now all of a sudden all the pathogens that are on the outside of my turkey packaging are sitting in my sink in this water. I'm not worried about it growing, but we did some research a couple of years ago where we looked at how people wash poultry, which we'll get to that, I'm sure, before
that's a whole other question.
Yeah, but what we know from when poultry is in sinks is pathogens end up in the basin of the sink, and we do a lot of food preparation in and around that sink, thinking about like rinsing vegetables in a colander, that it promotes that chance of bouncing. So to me, like that's one aspect. The other thing that I'd highlight is, and this is one that I don't think people think about as an option when you have a frozen turkey, but you can cook it from frozen. Like it's an entirely safe thing to do. It just takes longer. And so I think there's a perception that I can't cook a frozen turkey, right? Like, because it'll be pink and it's going to give me salmonella. And it's not true if I get it to the right temperature, to 165.
It's going to take a lot longer to get to the right temperature.
Absolutely.
And to add on to what Ben was saying, all of those are quality metrics, right? If the bird is cooked to 165 degrees Fahrenheit all the way through, then that takes care of all the safety concerns. And so this is not to say that you can't have a bird in your refrigerator longer. It's not to say that buying a frozen bird and thawing it and having it in your refrigerator thawed for a week is unsafe. If there are ways that this is the only opportunity you have, or this is what was given to you, or something like that, the safety concern is just that endpoint cooking temperature. And then if you are thawing, making sure that you're not increasing the risk by, carrying an unwrapped bird and rinsing it off, or something like that.
Yeah. Can I throw another thawing, I don't know, fun fact out or myth?
Okay, but be quick. I still have a lot of stuff to get through here.
No, Shib, we've got you until 9 Eastern. So
nice.
So there, and I guess I'm going to throw a little controversial one out there. So there are a lot of messages out there of don't thaw your turkey on the counter. Mm-hmm. And it's one of these messages. Not only do I talk about this all the time with the Safe Plates program, we really strive to try to like break down some of these myths, because it's not as simple as don't thaw it on the counter. You can safely thaw your turkey on the counter, but it is a complicating way to do it. I got to insulate it. I got to wrap it in newspaper to make sure that the inside and the outside of the turkey thaws at the same rate, so the outside doesn't get too hot.
Right, because the concern is that the outside would thaw first.
Yep.
But by the time the inside was thawed, the outside would have been too warm for too long and would potentially allow pathogens to grow and make somebody sick.
And not just pathogens growing, because the next logical thought is, well, you're going to cook it, so you'll kill them. It's pathogens that will grow, produce a toxin that is heat stable. So then you can roast it for hours and still have that. And you want gravy on your turkey, not toxin on your turkey. So that's why we say that the counter thawing, or that's what the risk would be. It's not just that you're going to grow something that you can then knock off when you're cooking it.
Right. Yeah. So people think, well, yeah, it was on the counter for a long time, but I'm just going to cook it anyway, so it'll be fine. And yeah, you'll kill the, creepy critter, but that won't stop you from getting sick because the toxin that it made is still present.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had this question last year. Someone had bought a frozen turkey at their lunch break, I think, wanted to take it home, put it in the oven on a delay timer for it to thaw and then cook by the time they got back from work. And the conversation was, if you're just letting this thaw uncontrolled, depending on all these other factors like ambient temperature of your house and all this kind of stuff, you could end up with this toxin formation in the cavity or on the surface of the bird that you're not going to be able to take care of when you cook it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And I guess the thing that I want to end on this is it is doable. Like there are ways to do it by wrapping it in newspaper, monitoring the outside of the temperature to make sure it doesn't get above 41 degrees for really more than 4 hours. And I can speak from experience. I have done that, and I've done it for a couple of reasons. One, I have a small fridge and I had a bunch of other stuff in there for this Thanksgiving gathering. And so it was like, how am I going to cook it from frozen? We're going to do it in the sink. And I needed to be able to thaw it in on the countertop. And I like, it's for me, one of those examples of there are all these kind of like truths out there in food safety, right? But none of them are actually extreme. It's always a combination of time and temperature. There are ways to manage these things. And I think the internet, that I sound like my dad there for a second, but I think that with the growth of accessible online scientific information, people are pushing the envelope on what we have done in the past and not sort of relying on dogma. And that's okay, as long as we're going to safe sources for these combinations.
Okay. So I'm going to go back for one more question on COVID, and then we're going to go dive into straight up food safety and some of those Thanksgiving myths that we were just talking about. So last question about COVID is that a lot of people, including myself, feel that like food is almost like an extension of love. It's like a way to show love, right? Like making somebody biscuits or a pecan pie or whatever, right? And so even if we are not going to be coming together to share a meal the way we normally would around the holidays, there's still that desire to make something with care and drop it off at somebody's door or whatever, to show that as an expression of caring and family and friendship and all that stuff. So what are the things that we need to do if we want to deliver holiday food to friends or family? What are the things that we need to do in order to do that safely?
Yeah. So I'll start with a couple things and then jump in because I'm sure I have ideas too. One, if you're committing to not being in close proximity to that person, that means not being in close proximity to that person, even if you're on other sides of the screen door. I know that's really hard, but I've done this earlier in the pandemic. It was, I made a meal for someone, I dropped it on the doorstep, went to the middle of the yard and waved from the other side of the yard. And it's a little weird, but it's a way you can actually see people and share food with them. And of course, like good hygiene and wearing a mask and all that kind of stuff, and making sure that they know that you're bringing them food and that they know to check for it if you're not going to call them, knock on the door, something like that, especially if it's something that either needs to be kept cold or needs to be kept hot. You want to make sure that they're not surprised to go out on their porch 4 hours later and find either melted ice cream or cooled off turkey and stuffing. Like, both of those are tragic for completely different reasons.
Yeah, time out. I had some freshly baked bread left for me that was eaten by squirrels. So it's not just food safety. It's a jungle out there.
Yeah.
So,
forgot about that.
Carry on. Sorry.
No, ahead. You're fine, because the squirrels in my neighborhood would demolish anything left at my door. They destroy my plants. So it's those same like best practices for COVID stuff as well as best practices for food stuff. And again, since Ben broke it down earlier, like transmission through food and food packaging is just not super likely from what we've seen. And so this is still a great way to have that shared meals just shared from different households if you drop it off. But the physical distancing part, the good hygiene part, the letting people know so that the food is not eaten by the enemy or melted or anything like that. Ben, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I guess the only thing that I want to highlight, because this did come up earlier in the pandemic about dropping meals off to people, and it comes up in food delivery situations, and if someone is, and this is where the dealing with this pandemic gets a lot into anxieties and I think the uncertainty of the unknown and how that plays into our really into our mind. And so for me, if someone's worried about receiving something from someone else, then washing my hands after handling the package is going to reduce that risk. It's really going to control, because the virus itself is not going to move from that Tupperware container or package to my respiratory system without my hands. So I physically can control that. Secondarily, if someone's really wants to do this, and I agree with you, Matt, this is one of those things that, especially right now, where we're looking for, where so many like personal connections have been taken away over the last 8 months, getting a meal or cookies or anything from someone, like for me to make something, it is such a great way to celebrate. We can't get together, but this is from me. This isn't like just that feeling. If I was concerned about not wanting to transmit the virus, then proper hand washing and wearing a mask while making that food certainly would make me feel better. Is it going to reduce risk? Probably not. It's not going to hurt anything, and it's certainly not going to increase risk. And so I think we need to think about it in those terms as well.
So one takeaway from this, for me at least, is that I'm now going to refer to squirrels as the enemy. That's my new name for them, which I'm very excited about. One of the things that we touched on earlier when we were talking about just buying turkey, and the fact that we're probably going to be getting, if we're buying turkey, a lot more food than any one household can polish off, right? So what about leftovers, right? So, what should people be doing to plan ahead? And this is not a COVID question. This is a food safety question, right? All these other foodborne pathogens that have been around for a long time. What should people be thinking about? How should people be planning to handle what are probably going to be more leftover? Like my recipe for potatoes, it's enough for like 15 people. And even if I cut it in half, that's more people than live in my house. So what should we be doing to prepare for this glut of leftovers?
Yeah.
All right, Natalie.
Yeah.
I apologize. I should have singled someone out. Natalie.
No, you're good. So like your example of the potato recipe, if you know that you cutting it in half is still going to be more than what your family can eat, if there's a possibility for you to cool anything that you know that you're not going to eat in that first meal or not going to eat in the first couple days, you can go ahead and cool that down and then prep it for freezing right away. Like if the recipe can't be divided, and if you're making it ahead of time, and go ahead and freeze half of it ahead of time, or even just knowing when you've made all the food that day, we're not going to be able to eat all of this in the next 7 days, then we're going to want to freeze some of it, making sure that you can get that food cooled down and refrigerated as quickly as possible, and then you can wrap it up, prepare it, and freeze it. I think for a lot of us, having leftovers from Thanksgiving in a month or two, if things become a little bit more where we want that comfort food, that's going to be appreciated, and we're going to pat ourselves on the back for planning ahead. That kind of thing, or the bird, if you can't find a 5-pound bird and you have to have a 16-pound one, then plan for, okay, you have this giant bird we just ate, that's great. Last thing you want to do is get back up immediately, but breaking that down a little faster so that you can cool it properly, so that you can prepare it for freezing or refrigeration even faster, is just going to reduce your risk. And that's going to end up with a higher quality frozen food if freezing is the way you go.
Right.
If you cool it down quickly and you package it up properly, and wrapping things tightly in plastic or wax paper and then foil, using freezer bags and freezer containers, all those are great ways to handle the leftovers if you're going to freeze them. And then, like you said, if the recipe can be cut in half or fourths or something, go for it. If not, like, all over the internet you can find what to do with your leftover turkey, so we can eat anything turkey for the next week.
Right. So, but now would be the time to inventory your freezer bag and
Yeah,
freezer container inventory and stuff like that, and make sure that you have what you need to save that stuff.
I would say so.
So one of the questions that we'd gotten, which I think is more a piece of trivia than anything, and I'm a sucker for trivia.
Will we need paper and a pen?
You will not, probably. So Ben, and you can both answer this one. You may have different answers. What leftovers last the longest? Fruitcake is not an acceptable answer because it's complicated. So fruitcake aside, Ben, what leftovers last the longest?
So all right.
Fine.
Let me think about my my normal Thanksgiving spread and all the sides, and let me give you the rundown. I've got turkey, I've got gravy, I've got cranberry sauce, I've got usually some sort of a root vegetable dish, some Brussels sprouts, and some mashed potatoes. Those are that's what's happening at the Chapman household.
I like where your head's at. Good job, Chapman.
Thank you. So for me, at the top of the list is going to be the cranberry sauce, and the reason, the reason is we are using a ton of sugar, and that's really going to help bind up a whole bunch of the available water and moisture for both spoilage microorganisms and or spoilage bacteria, but also molds and yeast. I think that would be at the top of the list.
And so the pH of cranberries are really low. So you've got a bunch of acid, you've got a bunch of sugar. That stuff will last for until Christmas.
Did that feel like we were cheating because we avoided all the other ones?
No, I think that's legit.
I think we should rank the rest of your Thanksgiving dinner though.
Like on appropriateness or for length of time for storage.
On risk. So cranberry sauce is least risky.
Yeah, and it's gonna stay the longest. Gosh, it's gonna be hard for me to parse out anymore. And maybe Natalie, you got a better thought on this. I could not say that one's gonna last longer than the other, because they all have kind of similar attributes. And I've prepared them in a way that the spoilage microorganisms that were there at the first might survive the cooking process. I'm unlikely to recontaminate them in my storage process. Maybe the vegetables are gonna spoil next, just because there's more molds and yeast in the soil. But that's my guess.
I'm thinking on the flip side that your gravy is going to probably be the riskiest one. Because if you're looking at the meat products and you have some of these bacteria that form a spore that can then grow and produce a toxin we talked about a little while ago. So I'd put gravy and turkey at your highest risk. And that's not a spoilage thing, but that's a reheat, recool if you're not just heating your own portion, if you leave it out too long, all that kind of stuff. And then for quality and you can give me that. Thanks.
I'll give you that one. That's good.
I have the mashed potatoes and the Brussels sprouts in the middle. Again, the quality wise, they might spoil a little bit faster, but as far as risk for food safety stuff.
So two questions that are oldies but goodies. They're ones that I know I get asked every year, and I'm sure you do too. So I'll give one of them to each of you. Natalie,
is this a lightning round?
This is
not the lightning round.
Okay.
I wish I'd thought to do one.
You can.
So Natalie, the one for you is, a lot of people when they buy turkeys, particularly frozen turkeys, they come with those little plastic things, buttons sort of things that are embedded in the turkey breast. And then as they cook, they pop up. And I believe the suggestion is that they give you some sort of information about the doneness of the turkey. So is that a reliable way to tell that the turkey is cooked properly?
No. So they might never pop up. They might wait until the internal temperature is 180 degrees to pop up. They might pop up when that part, they're going to only read that one area of the bird that they're in. So that area might be the endpoint cooking temperature, but the other part of the bird isn't. And
the temperature you want is?
You want 165 degrees. And that is like the standard. We tell everybody 165 internal temperature, check it at a couple different points. And we can make this more complicated if you want to, or you can tell me to not make it complicated. You could go to a lower temperature. You just have to cook it for a longer time. It's like what Ben was saying earlier is everything is, it's not just here your only ways of doing things. You can take the bird to a lower temperature. You're just going to have to make sure it stays at that temperature for a longer period of time. And that's internal temperature of the bird, not that you set your oven to 165
Right.
Well, it's a good question.
Yeah, so, essentially a good rule of thumb is if you want to make sure that you've cooked something which is not going to make a loved one sick, or that is almost certainly not going to make someone sick, you want to cook it to 165. But there's some flexibility there if you're going to maintain a lower temperature for a longer period of time.
Yep.
So Ben, the other question that is widespread, and this is a direction that is in so many recipes. It's in cookbook after cookbook. It's in recipe after recipe in cooking magazines. And that is that poultry, whether it's turkey or chicken or whatever, should be washed and then dried as part of the preparation process. What's going on? What is that all about?
All right.
What is that all about?
I knew this was coming.
I didn't think that was one you're going to give him.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things here. And there's actually a lot of history on this recommendation. So going back to when it was more acceptable in a retail setting to get poultry that had some blood or feathers still associated with it, still on it, not associated. It's not like they're accomplices in my meal. They are, but it would still be there. Like they weren't fully removed before I purchased it.
Mm-hmm.
That was a recommendation to remove whatever might still be there. As we move forward, that goes back over a century, and certainly if we look outside of the U.S. from where many of our ancestors came from, this is something that's been talked about for hundreds of years, all over the place. This is the first thing that that comes up. It really gained popularity in the 70s because Julia Child really talked about it in her cooking programs.
Mm-hmm.
And why? What was it? Actually, there is a little bit of science to this, especially the part that you said, Matt, on drying. So the thought is, and you may have seen this and maybe we can find a link to this. They're using a hair dryer to dry out the skin of. Have you guys seen this recently? You're not all up on turkey food safety science like
not on
that.
TikTok, Ben.
Yeah. So there's a hair dryer method of poultry of using that out to dry out the skin to make it crispier. And there is something about the drying that we sort of believe that's where that sort of came from. But
Natalie, I think it seemed like you had something you wanted to contribute as well.
Yeah, so part of this too is, and we've had these conversations for a really long time, it's this gain in popularity, but this is something that is passed down as the way to do things, right? And that's for a lot of us, we learn this is what we need to do because this is what my mom said, or this is what my grandma said, or this is what my auntie said, or this is how I was taught. And so this is one of those things where it's hard. I mean, the whole conversation's hard. Like, we're asking people to change what they do for a food and family related holiday. So this is washing your turkey is one of those things that seems to be really ingrained culturally, but it's one of those things too where we didn't know what all the risks were of spreading bacteria around in your kitchen and in the sink, and we have more information than we did when all those recommendations were made. And it's again, it's something that's hard because it's like that is what your family does, and saying we're not going to wash the bird this year might be something that needs a little bit of conversation, and that is difficult.
I'll tell you, it did in my mom's kitchen. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah,
it was a long talk.
For sure. And so it's one of those things that we don't say lightly from that perspective at all. But hey, maybe this is trivia Thanksgiving, and you're like, hey, I heard these people talk about this. This is what the risks are, and you can make that decision. Some people, for cultural and religious reasons, need to wash their meat and poultry. And if that is something that someone either chooses to do because they prefer it, chooses to do it because of religious or cultural tradition, then just clean and disinfect the area around it. Make sure you don't have like the drinking glasses next to it. We used to line our cups up next to the sink growing up so that we would just fill it in the faucet. Move those drinking cups away, wash the bird, and then clean and sanitize everywhere around it.
One thing before we leave this, because I want to put a plug in for some research that we did here at NC State on this exact question. And we'll throw a link into the Facebook live chat about this. But this is sort of this age-old question about what happens when you wash poultry, and we didn't do it with whole turkey. We did it with chicken thighs, but we brought a series of consumers into kitchens and asked them to prepare poultry just like they would at home. The I guess sneaky part of this study, well, there are two sneaky parts of the study. One was, as we recruited people on our questionnaire, we only asked for people that self-reported being chicken washers, not a derogatory term by any means, but they said, yeah, this is what I do, and here are the steps that I take. And we were really interested in is understanding more about that, because much of our messages have been built on what we think is happening, and we really wanted to understand by watching and understand the microbiology of it. The other sneaky part of this, and I say sneaky in to us amongst friends, but it is a technique that we use in food safety quite a bit, is where we conduct deception. So we get real behaviors. So we tell people, we kind of divert their attention. We told them, hey, we're working with an entrepreneur in North Carolina who's making spices, and it's spices for poultry. And what this study is all about is how you use these spices. So we're trying to tell people this is not a food safety study, right? Like without saying this isn't a food safety study. And we ask them to prepare foods, and then we look at what happens to contamination. The way we do that is by using non-pathogenic bacteria that's on that chicken to find out where it goes. And the thing that I'll leave you with, because I think this is the part that over the last, Matt and I have talked about, Matt, Natalie, and I have talked about this quite a bit. We conducted this research since we've really focused on this issue, and we found that 26% of the people that washed their chicken in our study also led to contamination of a side salad that they prepared alongside that poultry afterwards. And as Natalie said, the biggest surprise and takeaway for me as a researcher in this area was, I don't have the number in front of me, but I think it was like 10% of the people who cleaned and sanitized like they would at home. That's what we asked them to do. We were still able to find the tracer or bacteria in the sink. So it's I think I've switched my philosophy on this from this study and from where you grow, the more you're into this world. And it's kind of like, I know that it's going to be really hard to change the behavior of washing a chicken because it's ingrained. It's for all the reasons that Natalie said. But the behavior that we can put on top of it to reduce risk is really, really pay attention to the sink and the area in close proximity to the sink for cleaning and sanitizing afterwards, because that really could be the difference between a safe meal and an unsafe meal.
Right. And just for folks following along at home, when we talk about tracer bacteria or non-pathogenic bacteria, what we're talking about are bacteria, microorganisms that are sufficiently similar to like the bad guy, like disease-causing bacteria, that we can use them as stand-ins. But if you were to consume some, it would not make you sick. So that's what that was all about.
And to add even more on this, all of these types of processes have to go through an ethics board. They're making sure that no one is at risk for getting sick with this kind of stuff. So don't be nervous if your local university wants to do research.
No,
Sign up.
please don't. But we're talking about cross-contamination, talking about stuff from the sink, stuff going from the turkey to the sink to the salad, raises another question that I have, which has a couple parts, right? So we eat lots of different types of vegetables at holidays and whenever, right? So there's vegetables that we serve raw, like in salad. There's vegetables that we cook, like Brussels sprouts, right? And then there's vegetables that we peel and cook or eat raw, right? So the question is about washing vegetables, right? So obviously, if I'm serving lettuce, I want to wash that before I serve it. But what about food that I'm going to be like roasting or something? Like if I'm going to roast Brussels sprouts, do I still need to wash it? And what about stuff that I peel? Like I peel carrots or I peel potatoes. Do I need to wash those things before I peel them? Or like if I don't wash them, when I peel them, am I introducing anything that's on the surface to the part that I'm going to eat? So washing vegetables. Natalie, you can take the lead on this one.
Yeah. So initially what sticks out is you're going to want to wash your vegetables for a couple reasons. One of them is those root vegetables still have dirt on them or sand. And that's a quality concern most of the time. But if you think about, or at least if I think about how I do produce prep at my house, I'm often, I have peeling some stuff and some stuff's going to be chopped, and I might be doing all the chopping, and some of it's going to go in the oven, and some of it's going to go on a salad or something like that. So rinsing it off is only going to help you reduce whatever's on the surface. The exception there is the stuff that comes in a package that's already been washed. So if you have like triple wash lettuce, that has already been washed. It's already been washed in water that's treated to make sure that there aren't pathogens in the water. That's actually a case where you washing it is going to increase your risk of introducing something to it. So you have some of these vegetables, especially if you're going the route of making things easy for yourself and you're getting like the pre-washed, pre-chopped, whatever, in the grocery store, that stuff already has been washed. Washing it again is just going to increase your risk there. But if you got the whole head of romaine, then rinsing that thoroughly is going to be good for quality perspective because there's probably sand in there. And then also rinsing off whatever might be on the surface. And so
the collards, you're going to want to rinse it like 18 times.
Yes, for sure. For sure. Ben, we're going to add to that?
No, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, exactly.
What about the peeling? Like, should you wash food that you're going to peel, like carrots and stuff?
So, so on that, I mean, the same discussion sort of holds true. It's like, what is it that I'm trying to remove? If there's something that's visual and it's going to add grit to my meal, then certainly I would want to wash that first. If I'm peeling it, and I think of like the difference between russet potatoes and Yukon Gold potatoes,
Mhm.
right? Like those russets, they seem to hold more dirt in that skin, and so the peeling it, that action of peeling could just be like digging a little bit of grit directly into my into my potato that ends up getting mashed, and now I have like gritty potatoes. Certainly, it's a grit issue. It's not or a sand issue, but it's certainly not a safety issue at all, because ultimately, like Natalie said, I'm taking care of that with the cooking process. And so ship it kind of becomes like, what's your goal, right? If your goal is less grit, rinse away. If your goal is less foodborne illness, then it's not going to make a difference.
Okay. Okay.
And if you don't
Um,
want to peel your vegetables, also fine.
Yeah.
right. Um, okay. So now we're on to my favorite part of holiday meals, which is dessert.
I knew it.
Yeah. So this is a question that we got from somebody earlier today, actually, and it has to do with pie. So there are some pies that you can leave on the counter. There are some pies that you need to refrigerate. There are, and obviously we're, like we could be talking about apple pie versus um, pecan pie or whatever. But even like within the same type of pie, like there's some pumpkin pies that can be kept at room temperature and some pumpkin pies that have to be refrigerated. So A, why? And B, which are which? Like, how can you tell which ones are which?
Yeah.
And Ben, I'll let you go first on this one.
Sure. So for the most part, and this is one where like not all pies are equal. So for where a bunch of pies are equal are of the fruit variety. So if I'm looking at berries, I'm looking at apples. And Natalie mentioned this earlier as it related to cranberry sauce. The acidity of those foods really combined with all the sugar that's in there, because a unsweetened no sugar pie, I don't think for me is a very good idea. Um, but the both the acidity and all the sugar that we have in there, it's binding up the water and leading to this pH change. So pathogens aren't going to grow. That's what we're worried about when I leave something out on the counter, is will a pathogen that might be there grow, create a toxin, or just grow and lead to an infection.
Mm-hmm.
Where pumpkin pie and sweet potato pie, well, and so actually, let me take another slice of this question, right?
Good dad
Something
joke.
like a pecan pie, or as it's known in some parts of the world, a pecan pie. High sugar content. Also, this sort of gelatinous, like caramelized food with a bunch of nuts in it. Really, we're not looking at growth potential. But moving towards our like vegetable-y pies, or pumpkins. Yeah, I mean a vegetable.
Yeah,
And
cucumber.
and sweet potatoes is also a vegetable. It changes. Now we're not using acidity to control unless, and this is where there is like a little bit of a caveat. If I buy a pumpkin pie or sweet potato pie at a store and it was shelf stable, just from the regulatory world, something had to happen to make that shelf stable. Maybe there was a change in acid by adding some sort of an ingredient. Maybe there was some other another change in either the pH or the water activity. But if I'm making a pumpkin pie at home, or I'm making a sweet potato pie at home, I don't have the information to know whether it can be left on the counter safely.
Okay. Um, and I'm just curious, do you happen to know what the case would be for buttermilk pie by any chance? There is usually some citric acid added in the form of lemon juice. Buttermilk is more acidic than regular milk. Like, I'm just kind of curious as to which camp that would fall into, but we may have to punt on that one.
Good question. Natalie, what do you think?
I'm thinking it's going to go with other custard pies and probably not be acidic enough and probably not also have enough evaporation to lead to the water activity being low enough. I mean, if you would like to socially distance drop off a buttermilk pie for us to test, we could make that happen.
There we go. See, that was nicely done. I wonder if the sugar content is enough in the custard to bind up the water. I don't know. I mean,
and it could also be sugar and pH as multiple hurdles together
as a combo there. So I mean, on this one, and this is, I think it's a guess, and I don't really want to guess so much around foodborne illness at holidays. So I would err on, I think it's probably refrigerated.
Right on. That's what I do. That's what I do now. So
yeah.
So Natalie, you get the next one. So I will not be mailing anybody a buttermilk pie, apparently, safely. But what are the things that we need to be thinking about, in terms of mailing baked goods? Because we were talking before about dropping something off at somebody's house. But like, in terms of mailing baked goods, what should we be thinking about in terms of what is going to ensure that when our loved ones receive that gift, they do not get sick?
Yeah.
And we'll talk about baked goods, and then I want to talk about other types of food. So let's just limit it to baked goods for this one.
So I was going to say fruitcake, depending on how it's made, can survive a lot of things, including airmail. But picking a baked good that is not going to get crushed, that is something that is shelf stable to begin with and doesn't spoil quickly. So not like banana bread or pumpkin bread, probably, because that still has a pretty high moisture content. It's going to mold pretty quickly. And probably not fancy thin cookies, but if you have something that's a little bit more robust, like an oatmeal cookie or cheese crackers or something like that, will most likely ship relatively quick, like relatively easily, if it's packaged properly. If you really, really want to send something that doesn't have very long on the counter, like pumpkin bread or something like that, you're going to want to wrap it well and probably choose faster shipping for that kind of thing. If you really, really, really want to mail something that needs to be refrigerated, that's when you need to pull out all the stops with ice packs or dry ice and overnight shipping.
Okay.
But some people really, really want to mail a cheesecake. And so you'd have to do a lot to make sure that cheesecake would stay cold. And that's like coolers and ice packs and dry ice. And Ben is probably saying, don't do it at all.
No, all I'm saying is some people really want to mail a cheesecake. I really want to receive a cheesecake. And by mail, by however someone wants to get me a cheesecake.
How many scrolls are at your house?
I'm happy.
There are a lot of scrolls. I don't know if you're going to receive the cheesecake.
Right, fair enough. Yeah.
So
I don't want to mail one. I want to receive one.
Okay, I've got one more question for each of you.
Yeah.
So Ben, we touched on fruitcake. Fruitcake is one that comes up a lot. And this is a two-parter. It involves two holiday classics, fruitcake and eggnog. Both of them, the folklore is that if you put enough booze in the eggnog, you can leave it at room temperature for an extended period of time. The fruitcake one is that if you put enough booze in the fruitcake, it will last, I don't know, for like 1,000 years. To what extent does alcohol actually preserve food in terms of these two holiday contexts, eggnog and eggsnog?
Egg.
And fruitcake.
So, all right, I'm furiously Googling to see. I actually just recorded a couple of podcasts on this for a relatively new podcast that I do called Risky or Not, and I don't think they've hit yet. So for more on this discussion, check out riskyornot.co, because always be promoting. Um, secondly, as it relates to your specific question, Matt, in neither of these situations is alcohol the right mechanism for safety and preservation. So when it comes to fruitcake, and again, not similar to pies, not all fruitcakes are made the same, but for the most part, we are looking at all the constituents that go into that cake and the way the cake is made and the amount of sugar and the candied peel, all of the sort of your traditional cake, not carrot cake, fruit cake. That cake can certainly survive a long-term preservation. It just doesn't have the water activity needed for pathogens to grow. Now, there's tons of caveats to that. It's got to be all the same and right pieces. And
right.
we'll share a link to that on the Facebook Live to an article that Matt wrote about this a couple of years ago. Eggnog's a little trickier. So you and I'm gonna go back and to clarify your words, which is if I make eggnog with alcohol, I can let it sit out at room temperature. And it's actually a couple of things here. For me, what I'm concerned about with eggnog is not so much the sitting out at room temperature, but it's the eggs themselves, the raw egg aspect of it. And raw eggs, it's not a high risk food. It's certainly not as high risk as we historically might have seen it. It's like in the US, it's like 3 in 10,000 eggs have Salmonella enteritidis in them on average, right? We eat a lot of eggs. That with our surveillance, that's kind of where it is. Now, but that's certainly not zero risk. And every time I put an egg together with other eggs in my nog mixture, I'm magnifying that risk because each one of those carries that risk. And so that's to me the riskier part. Now, adding alcohol into it, there's been a little bit of research done on this, and holding alcohol, like, we're talking rum, 80 proof. Is that the correct? Yes, 80 proof rum, so 40% alcohol rum with eggnog. There was a study that was not ever published that showed if I held that at refrigeration temperatures and there was salmonella in the egg mixture at the start, that salmonella would go down over time if I held it in the refrigerator for like 4 days or 5 days, and it was alcohol plus contact time. But if I'm making it right now and I'm serving it right away, I don't have that same sort of protection. So for me, I'm going to start with no salmonella in my eggs, and then not worry about the alcohol as if it's protective or not. And so I can do that by purchasing pasteurized egg mixture that I can make my eggnog out of, or there are a couple of ways to pasteurize eggs at home to reduce that risk. And that's, to me, that's where I go with it. And also, just to note for the eggnog lovers out there, I do not enjoy eggnog. And so please don't take any specific quality advice from me because I will not choose to drink that beverage. But also, I won't look poorly on you. If you like eggnog, please consume it.
I adore eggnog, and Ben has been putting up with me for a very long time. So Natalie, I just had one last question for you, and then we'll wrap it up. But sort of going back to like stuff that people give or send around the holidays, one of the things that people will often do is make like infused oils, infused vinegars, things like this. It's a chance to be crafty, feel like you're being creative, and making something sort of handcrafted for other folks. But those products carry food risks of their own, which a lot of people don't really think about. So what are some of the things that people really need to like be aware of and be cognizant of as they're making these sorts of infused vinegars and oils and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it is definitely something that is all over social media as something to do, and it can be done safely in a lot of situations. But just like Ben was saying that alcohol is not a way to get rid of a food safety concern with eggnog. It's the same with an infused alcohol. Sticking a piece of bacon into a jar of bourbon does not make that bacon then something that can sit on the counter indefinitely, at least from a food safety standpoint. Same with vinegar. Putting fresh herbs into vinegar does not mean that there couldn't be mold, there couldn't be spoilage bacteria in there, there couldn't be continuing fermentation. The biggest one, the scariest one, the one that gives us nightmares, and I can say this because I've heard Ben say that he gets nightmares from this multiple times, is botulism, and botulism associated with infusing garlic into oil, which is one of the first ones that you'll see if you start searching. And that's because you have Clostridium botulinum, it's the bacteria that causes botulism.
And it lives in the dirt, right?
Yeah, it's all in the environment. It lives in the dirt, on fruits and vegetables, especially ones that are grown underground or really close. And it hates oxygen, so it's not doing any harm when it's exposed to oxygen. It can't grow and produce a toxin, but as soon as it gets into an anaerobic environment or environment without oxygen, then it can start coming out of this protective spore form, growing, producing a toxin, and that toxin is really lethal if it isn't caught and treated. And so garlic infused olive oil is like the first one you'd probably think of, but that one could be really, really risky if it isn't done properly. So there are recipes that are tested to make sure that you don't end up with botulism growth, you don't end up with growth of other bacteria and stuff like that. For oils, and vinegars, it often is either treating whatever you're infusing with, so the herb or the oil, with a blanching step to kill off any bacteria on the outside, treating it with citric acid to make sure the acid completely penetrates beforehand. Or it's one of those things where if you just want to experiment at home, put it in the refrigerator. Keeping it in the refrigerator, having the temperature at 41 or below, that will prevent botulism from growing. That will prevent the spoilage stuff from making it that you're fermenting a little bit extra, all that kind of thing. So it's one of those things where if you just want to run wild with it and do all the crafty stuff, keep it in the fridge. If you want to give it to someone, take it out and tell them to put it in their own refrigerator.
Right. And this applies, so we were talking about oils and vinegars, but it applies to like infused honey and infused liquor as well, right? So like putting chili peppers in vodka or whatever.
Yeah. And some of these are lower risks, right? So if you have like a dried chili going into vodka, that's going to be lower risk than a fresh chili going into vodka, because there's going to be less that's going to survive on something that's already dehydrated, right? So if you take that water away, the water's already not been available for bacteria to grow. And so, people wanting to do like a bread dipping oil and just adding dried herbs and black pepper and salt is going to be different than also adding garlic to it.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank all of you for letting me pick your brains this evening. And thanks everybody following along at home. If you have any additional questions that we did not get to, please know that Safe Plates at NCSU, is part of the NC State Extension, has lots of resources related to food safety and COVID safety and the holidays. So you can Google Safe Plates NCSU and you should find it. That should not turn up too many incorrect web destinations. Anyway, thanks for being with us tonight, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for hosting.
Thanks, Matt.